Hello and welcome, this is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to try out the Sizzix Stencil and Stamp tool. I was lent this and asked to tell them my opinion, so I thought I'd take you along and film it and just see how it is. So first off, it's really quite large. The base of it is 14 1/4 inches by 9 3/4 inches. So it's bigger than any stamp platform or stamping tool that I've used before. That mint green thing, I'm not actually going to be using it in the video. It's a stencil adapter for Sizzix stencils, and I'll be showing it a little bit later, but not actually using it. So there is a piece of large sticky grid paper that's bigger than an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that goes in the base of this tool. And if you've never used sticky grid before, it's kind of like a huge post-it note. So it's got some good adhesive that helps to hold your project or your stencils or whatnot while you're working with them. You can also use the smaller pieces in your die cutting machine if you want to hold things in place while you're die cutting them. To put it on, I just peeled off the backing off about 1/4 of it and then lined it up and then took the rest of the backing off while I was pressing it down to make sure I didn't get any bubbles on the surface of the tool. On the other side of the sticky grid, there is a grid pattern, so it makes it really easy to line everything up. The clear top plate comes right off. On one side, there is a grid texture. There's not printed lines, it's just kind of engraved in that top part. The other side is completely smooth. So I'm going to put a piece of cardstock down, I'm sticking it to the sticky grid, and I'm going to line up my stamp. I want to stamp and emboss this stamp. You don't want to be using heat on the base of this stamp tool, so I'm going to stamp it and then do the embossing off of the tool. Now, because of the large size of this tool, you really need a lot of space to be using it. I think it would be perfect if you liked working on scrapbook pages or large mixed media projects. If you're just a card maker, it's probably a little bit too big for what you need. Because that base is 14 1/4 inches and the hinge is on the short side, you need like 28.5 inches to be able to open it completely flat. And for most people, well, for me anyways, I needed to actually clean off my desk to be able to fit it so that it would lie flat. And you'll see that I kind of keep moving it back and forth from being horizontal and vertical. So while I have my piece of cardstock off of the background there, I'm just putting some black embossing powder on there, putting the rest back into the jar, and then I will heat it with my embossing tool. If you've never embossed before, I used a clear sticky ink called Versamark to stamp the image, and you didn't really see it because it was clear, and then I poured on the embossing powder, and it just sticks to that ink. If by chance you have any grains of embossing powder that are left on the cardstock, you can just take a soft brush and brush it off, and then you need to use an embossing tool to heat that powder right where it is. You definitely need an embossing tool for this. A blow dryer will not work. A blow dryer will just blow the embossing powder off and dry up the ink. So you need something that's just going to emit heat and melt the powder right where it is. Once I have that piece embossed, I'm going to put that piece of cardstock right back on the sticky grid, and I'm going to use the coordinating stencil to this stamp, and I'm going to use that to color in my image. Now, the one thing I really love about having the sticky grid as the base is the stencil is just a little bit bigger than the cardstock, and that sticky grid, when I press it down, it holds it in place, so I don't have to tape anything in place. So that I found really, really handy about this tool. I'm using different colors of distress ink to blend and fill in those areas of the stencil. And I'm just using stencil brushes or blending brushes to do that. It makes it really quick and easy to color these images. Now, this stamp could have been colored in any way. You could watercolor, you could color it with markers. If I were to do coloring in those ways, I probably wouldn't be using this tool for that. I'm only using this tool because it helps to hold down those stencils, and it is really handy for that. For other coloring, I wouldn't be using it simply because I would be having my hand on the sticky grid, and I think that would be a little bit annoying after a while. While it's handy to have it held down, when you're coloring, you tend to, or I tend to rotate my project around as I'm coloring it, and I think this would not be handy for that. And if you're the type of person that likes to use larger stencils, like 8.5 by 11 stencils or the 8 by 10, that sort of thing, I think this tool would be really, really handy for that, for holding down the large projects. I think it would be a better way of utilizing all the space on this platform. Now I have almost the whole image done. I'm just going to do the last one, which is the centers of the flowers. I'm doing it in a burgundy color. And one thing that I love to do when I use layering stencils is use some different textures. I like to use distress inks or just inks to blend in color, but I like to use shimmer sprays or perfect pearl sprays or texture paste to give some extra texture, sparkle, and dimension to these card fronts. It's one of those things that's very simple and easy to do, but it just adds so much to a card front, in my opinion, by adding that extra shimmer and extra texture. Now, because I don't want to get this shimmer onto the sticky grid and have that possibly transfer onto other projects, I'm just using some scrap paper to stick down, and that sticky grid really gripped it nicely to hold it in place while I'm spraying. And that way I can make sure that I don't get it anywhere else. I'm going to let that first layer dry while I go and clean off my stencils. And then once those are clean, I'm going to use my last stencil, and I'm going to put some transparent texture paste, and I'm going to put a little bit of it in the center of the flowers, and then I'm going to put some microfine glitter on top. I often do glimmer paste or glitter paste to do this, but I have used all of mine up, and rather than getting something new, I just figured I would come up with different ways of adding that texture to the center. So I just added that to the center, and then I'm going to put some microfine glitter on that. It's going to stick to the wet paste and will create some shimmer in the center of my flowers. Now that I'm done using that tool, I'm going to take the backing from the sticky grid and I'm going to put it right back onto the exposed sticky grid. I'm going to leave the rest of it on the tool because I think it could be used over and over again. But by covering that exposed adhesive, I can make sure that it doesn't collect dust. Now that mint piece that comes with this stencil and stamp tool is a stencil adapter. Sizzix stamps or stencils have two little holes in the top, and by using the adapter, it fits right over the hinge, and you can position it exactly where you want your stencil to be, and you only have to put those two holes on the stencil in order to layer or line up the different layer stencils that Sizzix creates. Now on to the next part of the card. I wanted to create some sentiments, and I'm going to use my Perfect Sentiments hot foil plate to do that. I got some black matte foil and I really wanted to try it out, and I thought it would be perfect for this card. It'll coordinate well with the black embossing outline that it has. So I've got a piece of foil here that's a little bit bigger than my hot foil plate. I'm taping everything down, and I do this while my Glimmer machine is heating up. If you've never done hot foiling before, I have a whole playlist dedicated to some of the different projects I've done with it. I use my Glimmer machine to use the heat for the foil, and then I'm going to use my Big Shot machine for the pressure. In order to do hot foiling, you need both heat and pressure in order to make it work. And I have a Big Shot machine. It works perfectly in that, and that provides the pressure that the foiling plates need with the foil. So once that's done, I'm taking my stack apart. That hot foil plate is so heavy that the tape just didn't hold when it was hot, but look at how pretty that foiled image is. Now, if you didn't have a foiling machine, there is also a coordinating Perfect Sentiments stamp. You could just stamp the image as well. While I foil, I like to use my solid hot foil plate and foil the negative part of the foil just to make sure to eliminate waste. And then those negative pieces, or the pieces that I don't use, I just put those extra sentiments in a bin so that I have lots of sentiments to choose from in the middle of project if I didn't necessarily want to pull out my Glimmer machine each and every time. So this is the negative part here. You just use that solid hot foil plate. The stacking is exactly the same, and then you peel off the clear coating that's on the foil, and we're good to go. There is a coordinating die that goes with this foiling plate, which makes it perfect for cutting out a whole bunch of sentiments at once. You could fussy cut them if you wanted, but die cutting just gives such a nice finished look, and that's definitely my preference. So I'm going to put this through the machine and die cut them. I did notice while I was doing this, I do my die cutting with the blade side up, and I noticed that as I was putting it through the machine, it was misaligning towards the end of it. So I created a fix for this. I have my next video, I'll be sharing what I figured out with this. So if you're having this issue too, tune into the next video and I'll share how I solved this issue. And it's a really simple trick, but I just didn't want to include it in this one here. So while I have everything out, I'm going to die cut the negative part as well. It's exactly the same process as the first one. And I love how with one pass through the die cutting machine, I have a ton of sentiments to choose from. as well as extras for a future project. So now it's time to get the card together. I've got a yellow base here and I'm just using a black mat. It's going to tie in the black that has been in this project from the embossing as well as the sentiments. I'm going to glue on the front image panel. I'm just using Distress Collage Medium to glue everything together. I love using Distress Collage Medium. It's a nice thick glue. It doesn't warp the cardstock and it dries completely matte and completely clear. I die cut a few extra silhouettes of the sentiments and I'm going to glue them to the back of the foiled one just to give it a little bit of extra dimension. You could also use foam dots with this. That would work as well. This is just a little bit stiffer and just gives it a little bit more structure. And really, honestly, it looks a little bit nicer rather than having foam dots that you can see from the side of the card. While I have those stacked together, I'm just going to put an acrylic block on top of there. And yes, it's a dirty acrylic block. It really needs to be cleaned. I just would rather craft. And it just holds everything in place and flat and keeps my hands free for doing something else. So now that we are done our card, back to the Sizzix Stencil and Stamp tool. I really actually quite liked it. The one thing that I wish is that they had the hinge on the side. I think it would have made it take up a little bit less space. And I think it's a perfect solution for someone that likes to do a variety of sizes of projects. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a fantastic day.